Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Braddy. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to episode 31 of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Braddy, and in this episode, we're going to talk about something that has rapidly become part of our new normal and whether it's all that it's cracked up to be as you are leading your remote teams, and that is video conferencing. So before we get into all that though, as always, I just want to take a moment to thank you for being here. If you enjoy this show and you get value from it, please subscribe, rate, and review it. And remember, if you've got a question about positive leadership, just drop me a line at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com and I'll address it in a future episode. All right, so let's talk about Zoom or WebEx or Skype or whatever app you might have used recently to do a video meeting, a video chat, whatever, and why you might want to hit pause before scheduling another video conference call. So as we talked about on last week's episode, the majority of the American workforce has been working from home during the pandemic, right? So that number, the percentage of Americans working from home jumped from 45% back at the beginning of March to 62% in April. So, I mean, almost 2/3, and that number could even be higher at this point. But the fact is, a ton of people are working from home. That might include you. It might include your teams. You may be leading a remote team now. And certainly, in the wake of all that, technology has been our friend in facilitating this, right? It allows us to work from home. And in fact, downloads for video chat apps absolutely surged as leaders and managers used video conferencing for meetings over the last month or two. Families and friends have also been using these video apps, right? To stay connected, to celebrate birthdays, enjoy a happy hour. So there's no doubt that these apps do have their benefits. However, like anything else in life, too much of a good thing can be not a good thing, right? So if you've been feeling quote unquote Zoom fatigue recently, and of course I use Zoom as a generic term here for all video apps, if you have been feeling Zoom fatigue, you are not alone. And I was so glad to learn this, by the way, because a few weeks ago, I noticed that I felt drained after any type of Zoom meeting, whether it was related to work or fun. And at first I thought it was just the introvert part of me feeling tired, and I really didn't think much more about it. Then I started to see articles about it and the research on this phenomenon and realized, okay, actually Zoom fatigue is a real thing and we all need to be aware of it. So you as a leader need to be aware of it, but your team also needs to be aware of it too, so that we're all protecting our energy. Because remember, you know, if we want to maintain a positive culture and a positive work environment, be it in person or remotely, we need to have the energy for that, right? Because we know positive energy actually uplifts people. But if we're doing things that actually drain energy, that's not going to be good for team morale. It's not going to be good for productivity. It's just not going to be good for the overall culture. So this is really important. And actually, there was a fabulous piece by Kate Murphy in the New York Times recently, kind of explaining, and she went into great depth. So I'm just going to give you the cliff notes here about why it is that this Zoom fatigue happens, right? And why it's a real thing. So the research shows that video communication can leave people feeling burned out, feeling foggy, alienated, tired, and uncomfortable. Ugh. None of which we want, right? For us or our team. And part of the reason is that as humans, we're hardwired to read facial expressions, right? We're looking all the time at facial expressions. We get our cues from those. And when we see those in video, they can be distorted or pixelated. Sometimes they get frozen, right? Because the feed isn't great. And when that happens, it causes cognitive problems, right? It alters our perceptions and it interferes with our ability to mirror others' emotions, which, whether you realize it or not, you're doing, right? I mean, that is how we actually communicate effectively with one another. We're looking for those visual cues. We're mirroring them back, and that's where effective communication happens. But none of that happens effectively over video. And so when we're not able to effectively complete these built-in cognitive functions that we have, that we're hardwired for, no wonder we're left feeling unsettled and drained. I just got off a virtual conference where it was hosted on Zoom. The people hosting the conference did a fabulous job of keeping people engaged. I really was impressed with how they did it, but it still didn't matter in terms of how fatigued I felt afterwards. And it was actually a 2-day conference, 3.5 hours each day. Yes, they had a break halfway through, so that was nice. But both days, yesterday and today, I came off it and I literally felt like my head was swimming. It was, it sort of mirrored the research. I felt foggy, I felt disconnected, and I felt very, very drained. And both days I had to literally just walk away from my desk, take my dogs for a walk, get outside, and try to clear my head and just step away from work for a while. I could not be productive after being in that Zoom environment for so long. So this is a real thing. Now, another factor is trust. Okay, it can impact our willingness to trust people, because even though we see each other face to face over video, we're not actually able to look at each other in the eye. And think about that. In a real, true, in-person, face-to-face interaction, a lot of the communication is done through the eyes, right? We're looking at each other's eyes. And so when you can't do that on video, it can affect how much you're willing to trust someone. Plus, depending on camera angle, depending on where people are looking while they're on camera, they might come across as, being distracted, uninterested, aloof, even guilty, right? Because their eyes are going in a different direction than just straight on at the camera. So these video conferencing calls might actually adversely impact the ability to trust one another. And that to me is really disturbing, because obviously we want trust in our team. It's foundational. And especially right now, we need to trust one another. We need to know that we can rely on one another, right? And then finally, and this one made me chuckle the most, is, it's just simply self-consciousness, right? Like, because let's face it, when we're on these Zoom calls, we are checking ourselves out. I mean, if you're not, then I don't know. You're like in 1% of the population or something, but we are checking ourselves out, and we can feel incredibly self-conscious, which of course leads to feelings of discomfort. And I mean, this is real. I don't know about you, but I have definitely been cringing at how I look right now, 2 months into a lockdown with no access to hairstylists or waxing services. I mean, Roots and Monobrow, anyone out there with me? Yeah, you feel me. I know you do. So just our own discomfort with how we appear on camera can be another source of energy drain as we're on these video conferencing calls. Now, what's really interesting is that the other side of the coin, the research actually shows that no visual of people's faces can actually be better than a faulty visual, right? It can actually be better for communication to just not have any kind of visual at all. Because without visual cues, people become much more sensitive to what is being said and the tone in which it's being said, right? I mean, because think about it, you've got fewer senses available to you when you're on a telephone call. It's really only your hearing that is the sense that's available, versus on Zoom or whatever, video conferencing you're using, you have sight and you have sound, right? But the sight part, as we've talked about, is not really a perfect representation. We can't look the person in the eye. We can't necessarily always get those visual cues. And in the process of trying to work extra hard, because the whole video conferencing experience is taxing us cognitively, we may not be listening and using our sense of hearing as acutely as if the visual cues weren't there in the first place. So, hey, guess what? Maybe the old telephone is your friend after all. Maybe it's a case of old friends are the best friends, right? Now, what does all this mean for you managing your team remotely? I mean, it's all very interesting, this research and realizing that this is a real phenomenon, but what's the action item here, right? Like, how does this affect you and what should you do? I mean, should you just not use video conferencing at all? No. What this means is that before you organize another video conference with your team, pause and ask yourself whether it's absolutely necessary, or would a regular telephone conference call work just as well? I mean, for example, if someone needs to share a presentation on screen, by all means, video conferencing is probably the best way to go. However, maybe it's about relaxing the cameras on the protocol, at least while the presentation is being given, and maybe only requiring them for actual discussion or small breakout groups. Or, and most of the platforms have this option. Instead of organizing a meeting, you can organize an actual webinar. There's two different functions. And so in the webinar function, only the presenter and his or her screen is visible. You can't see everybody else, right? It's not like, that matrix of multiple faces that comes up in that gallery view. It's just the person presenting. It's just their screen they're sharing, and we don't get to see anybody else. So there's options within choosing to actually do the video conferencing, right? Now, if you don't have a presentation being given, at least a visual presentation, that is, right? I mean, someone might still present something, but they might not have a PowerPoint. It might not be visual. If a visual is not needed for a presentation, or there is no presentation, maybe a telephone conference call will serve you and your team better. Just, hey, sometimes the old technology can be, the go-to. And of course, you're a positive leader. Ask your team. Right? Involve them. Ask your team, how are they feeling about video conferencing? Are they okay with it? Do they want more or less of it? I'll be surprised if you come back and tell me they want more of it. Because the more I have talked to people about this week, and the more I've read about it, it seems like everybody's scaling back on their video conferencing these days. It's like we swung the pendulum too far in favor of video conferencing, and we need to find a sort of a happy medium for how we use it. So ask them, how they're feeling about it. And maybe, do they want to create new ground rules about having cameras on during the meetings? That's the other aspect of this too, right? I mean, we're all navigating this modified world together. And there's no doubt that remote working is going to continue. It's probably even going to grow even as the threat of COVID-19 starts to decline. So, hey, flex your positive leadership muscles. Be open. Be flexible and consult with your employees so everyone feels involved in creating your team's new norms, right? Like in some respect, hey, it's carte blanche, right? I mean, you don't have to just follow everyone like a sheeple and decide you have to do video conferencing because everyone else is. You decide with your team what works best for us, what is better for our collective energy? What is better for our individual energy? What are the norms or the protocols that we want to create around having meetings these days? How often? What type? Is it video? Is it telephone? You know, there's all these different permutations that you and your team can come up with together. All right. If you've got questions or you want to share how you're leading your remote working team during this crisis, drop me a line at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I always love to hear from you. So keep your comments and your notes rolling in. I love them. Plus, if you want to address a specific topic in these episodes, just let me know and I will address it on a future show. Also, if you want some simple practices that can increase positivity for you and your team, just go to my website, happinessatworknow.com, where you can download my book, 25 Tips for Leaders, How to Leverage the Science of Happiness to Increase Performance, Productivity, and Profitability, absolutely free. All right, that's it from me for this week. No matter what you're dealing with in your life right now, whether you're continuing to stay at home or you're getting back out there, please be safe and well. And thank you, as always, for choosing to be part of the Positive Leadership Movement and for inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.